everyone, welcome to the British History live show on the British History channel with me, Philippa Lacey-Brule. Today is the first episode of 2025, and indeed actually of British History Live. This is this is our new show. It replaces Tea Time History Chat. It's at our new time, 6:30 p.m. UK time. And we are going to go every 2 weeks, fortnightly, if you use that language. Covering various history topics, history in the news, and we also have some new features which I will get onto shortly. Thank you so much if you are joining me live. I'm streaming on YouTube and Facebook. A warm welcome to you if you're being able to join me at my new time, but also to you if you are listening on the catch-up or indeed the podcast. So coming up on today's show, this might take us a while, so bed in. I hope you've got some time. You can always come back later if you can't stay for the entire thing. But based on or inspired by some of the history anniversaries which are happening actually yesterday and today around Edward the Confessor and the coronation of his successor Harold Godwinson, but also that falls on the anniversary of the coronation of King Cnut, who you may or may not know much about. So I wanted to go into that, the link between those three men. So that's going to be the sort of bulk of our topic, of our discussion today. I'll also be able to take you through a little bit about how this show is going to work from now on. There's some input that I'd like from you, possibly, if you would like. I'm also going to talk about some history in the news. So there's a couple of articles I thought you might be interested in. One's around DNA testing, actually linked to Anglo-Saxon times, which of course links to our main sort of discussion of the day. And also one about Stonehenge, which is just interesting because it's just ongoing, what's Stonehenge for? And there's another theory now, which kind of builds on previous theories. But anyway, we shall go into that because I've also found a lovely sketch of an artist's impression, I suppose, of what Stonehenge would have looked like that was drawn in 1880. So anyway, I'm going to bring that up as well. I'm also going to bring you every fortnight news on history events, either online events or in-person events that you might be interested in. So I'll be doing that. And I've got a new feature, which we're going to do right at the end, which I hope you enjoy as much as I do, based on actual attempts to create videos or images to go with posts, these on this day in history posts, which we do on Instagram fairly regularly. AI come up with some very interesting interpretations. And so I'm going to present at least one, in fact, two today to you of what AI came up with when I asked it to create. One was the Thames freezing over in 1310, and the other was Whitehall Palace, which the anniversary of it burning down is around about this time as well. So anyway, I will come back to that at the end. It's they're interesting. They're very interesting. AI on one hand is worrying, and on the other hand, well, you'll see what I'm talking about in a bit. So before we get on to the main part, just a heads up to look out for an interview which will be going live on YouTube on the 21st of January. If you're a member of my Patreon, it will be available to you from the 14th of January. And this is my interview with Dr. Jonathan Healy, the author of this book, The Blazing World, a new history of revolutionary England. This takes us through the 17th century, from the death of Elizabeth I. There's witch hunts in there, the Catholic unrest during James I, England, the Civil War, of course, with his son Charles I, ends up losing his head, spoiler alert. Britain sort of becoming this experiment with parliamentary rule for 11 years, resulting in them asking the monarchy to come back. And then how the throne sort of passed from Charles through to his, Charles II, should I say, through to his brother James II. And that led to the Glorious Revolution. it's exciting, it's entertaining, and I'm looking forward to talking to Jonathan about it. Members of my Patreon have had opportunity to put in questions for Jonathan, which I will be putting to him at the interview. The focus of this interview with him, although I've just there outlined, who was in charge, who was ruling at the time, the actual focus of the interview I'm going to do with him is going to be more about the ordinary folk, which he talks about quite a lot in this book, thanks to what seems to be, and maybe I should ask him, a plethora of records, many of them actually court records, people getting into trouble for things. But we can see a human side of, human glory, grime, how they interacted with the state, and how that changed over the 17th century quite significantly. We see the rise of propaganda use, but propaganda towards the masses, not just trying to bring other elites on side. And there's so many parallels between the 17th century and modern day England. Honestly, there are some paragraphs that you read and you think that could be written about today, genuinely could be written about today. So I want to discuss that with Jonathan and get into that. So the interview with Jonathan, the author of this book, will be available in my Patreon, patreon.com/British History on the 14th of January, and on general release on the 21st of January. And of course, if you're a member of my Patreon, you will get to ask questions as usual for all of my guests that are coming up. You also get the extended interview, which is their answers to those questions, basically, and you get it ad-free. So all good, all round. Okay. So just as a reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, please do hit the like button, the thumbs up, subscribe, and you can go to the bell icon to get notifications of when I'm going live. If you're on Facebook, presumably you can like the video as well. Hope. I'd love to see your comments as well. I can see people wishing me Happy New Year. Happy New Year to all of you too, and thank you for joining me live. Right, let's get on to it's fairly, well, I tell you what, fascinating. I want to, but complex. So bed in, stick with me. We can get this done. Today, so we're on the 6th of January, is the anniversary of both the coronation of Harold Godwinson, Harold II, and we'll come on to why he's the second, and the coronation of King Cnut, a Danish king, which had happened in 1017. It's also the date that Edward the Confessor was buried. So there's a link between these men. So 5th of January 1066, Edward the Confessor dies at the Palace of Westminster, and he'd built Westminster Abbey. Unfortunately, he couldn't go to the consecration, which I think happened on the 28th of December. He was just too ill, so he didn't actually get to. I'm sure he did have a peek inside the abbey as it was being built, but he wasn't able to attend the coronation. He wasn't able to attend the consecration. So he dies on the 5th of January 1066, and is buried the following day, the 6th of January, the first person to be buried in Westminster Abbey, the abbey that he's built. And later on in the same day, his successor, Harold Godwinson, who's not a blood relation, is crowned, probably in the same sort of area. And we get Harold II. Like I say, I'll come back to tell you why he's the second. So, and that's on the anniversary of King Canut's coronation back in 1017. So I want to explore the links between these three men. So we're going to do it in fairly chronological order. So we're going to start with Canute, because Canute becomes king in 1015 when he invades. Intent on subduing the English, King Ethelred the Unready is on the throne, having recently returned after being banished to Normandy. He wasn't very popular. He was in Normandy because that was the homeland of his queen, Emma. But Ethelred died on St George's Day, the 28th of, the 23rd. St George's Day is the 23rd of April. I do know that without reading my notes. I don't know where the 28th came from. So he dies on the 23rd of April, 1016. So Ethelred the Unready is succeeded by his son from his first marriage to a lady called Elfgafu, and that is Edmund Ironside, who you may have heard of, and he succeeds. Now, the forces of King Edmund and the Dane King, oh no, he's not king at this point, the Dane Canute, fought across the summer of 1016. Canute took hold of the north, and cut a long story short, they end up coming to a formal arrangement where the pair meet. They meet near a place called Deerhurst that you might have heard if you're into Anglo-Saxon England, and if you've been following me for a while, because I did a few videos. If you're on my Patreon, there's a video from Deerhurst. But anyway, they meet near Deerhurst and they pledge oaths to each other. As an aside, it is during this this summer of sort of Canute trying to take over and Edmund. I mean, they're quite well matched, it sounds like. It's during this time that we see, where have I got him? Uhtred. Now, any of you who've been following me for a while will know that I'm a big Last Kingdom fan. And there's Uhtred, son of Uhtred, yes, of Northumbria. Now, he was a real man, but there's not enough about him in order for him to have followed a certain life or storyline in that. And it's actually during this that the Uhtred of Northumbria comes into the chronicle, and it's because he's actually described as, quite simply, the most important man in the north of England. Now, when Canute comes over and seizes York and takes control of York, Uhtred sort of takes the pragmatic approach, meets with him, pledges his allegiance and his oath. Unfortunately, Canute has him killed. So that's the end of Uhtred. So maybe that's why Uhtred is was such a good candidate for the fictional character Uhtred in Last Kingdom. But anyway, any of you who watched Last Kingdom, I thought you might be interested in that. So after the agreement between King Edmund and the Dane Canute, they kind of split the country. So Edmund remains in charge of Wessex, Canute, Northumbria, and Mercia, which is a big area actually. But on the 30th of November 1016, Edmund dies. Now, at the time, there's no foul play sort of suggested. Later on, there are rumours, I mean, like half a century later and in a different country, there are rumours that he was poisoned. I think from my reading that there was another rumour that he was shot up the bum. But either way, those weren't mentioned at the time. And the upshot of it anyway, pun not intended, but how funny, led to Canute being the sole ruler of England. And the Chronicle actually describes it as that. So it just says this. I love the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Is quite interesting. It's funny in the way it's written. AD 1017, this year King Canute took to the whole government of England. There you go. He also marries Ethelred's widow, and the Chronicle states it as the king gave an order to fetch him the widow of the other king Ethelred. So there you go, fetches her. Canute is the one that you might have heard of who sets his throne up next to the sea to commands the sea not to wet him. Now, apparently, there's nothing in the contemporary records which actually sort of make comment on whether that was a they don't comment on an explanation for his intentions for that. Was it a stunt? Was it genuine? What happened when the sea inevitably did wet him? Don't know. But anyway, that is this Canute. Now to Canute's links to both Edward the Confessor and Edward's immediate successor in 1066, Harold Godwinson. So the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle like I say, notes in 1017, so pretty much straight away, that Canute marries Emma of Normandy, Ethelred the Unready's widow. This Canute becomes stepfather to Edward, the future Edward the Confessor, and his brother, who you might not have heard of. Edward the Confessor had a brother called Alfred. However, not a very cosy domestic setup. The boys had to escape to their mother's homeland in Normandy to, basically to escape being slain by Canute. So, stepfather, but in the worst sense. Emma went on to have children by Canute, including a daughter, Gunhilda, and a son called Harthacnut, which I'm presuming is like Old Norse for junior. So we've got Canute, and we know Edward the Confessor is now alive, but he's a child and he's in Normandy. There will be two kings in between these two. Now here's where it starts to get interesting and a little bit complicated. So let's go. Canute had been married before he married Emma. He'd been married to an English woman called Elfgifu, who had been so before he was King of England, he'd been married to an English woman called Elfgifu, and he'd had two sons with Elfgifu, Svein and Harold. He quietly ignored the polygamy issue, as it appears everyone else did around him. However, it was his son by Elfgifu that became king after Canute died in 1035. So let's recap. I'm going to go through the children. Ethelred had been married to Emma, and they'd had two sons, Alfred and Edward. Yes, and they're in Normandy, being safe. Ethelred had been married before Emma to another lady called Elfgifu. Believe it or not, there were two. And their son was Edmund Ironside, who we've talked about was king at the same time as Canute. And then when he died, Canute became king. So he's dead. His bloodline, however, is not dead. He'd had a son. In fact, he had two sons, and they were shipped off to the continent, and they were supposed to be disposed of, but actually they survived. Canute had also been married before. He'd been, so like I say, he'd been married to Elfgifu of Northampton, and they'd had two sons, Svein and Harold. Canute then married Emma, and they had a son called Harthacnut. So basically, there are many boys, sons, available for the succession when Canute dies in 1035. There are a number of candidates. So a Witenagemot, so a meeting of the wise, a Witan, was held in Oxford. And there were two main factions: those who were in favour of Canute's son by his English wife, and those who were in favour of Canute's son by Emma, Harthacnut. So they are. So we have those two now. I mentioned one of the sons was called Svein. He died just before this Witan. So the two candidates, as far as this Witan were concerned, were Harold, Canute's son, by Elfgifu, and Canute's son by Emma. I hope you're keeping up. so we have them now. Not only have you got two candidates, but you have two factions in England. One led by Earl Godwin, and one led by Earl Leofric. Now, Earl Godwin had been, well, I'll talk more about Earl Godwin in a minute, but basically these two men, Godwin and Leofric, are the main earls, the main men behind, in terms of power, the king. So they're very, very influential, and they are enemies. So you have these two now. However, one of them is in the country and one of them isn't, and that would end up playing the biggest influence on who became king. So Emma obviously wants her son Harthacnut to become king. She claims that Canute said that only the children by her was his intention to take over the English throne. of course, she's been queen twice already. She was queen for as the wife of King Ethelred. She was queen by becoming the queen of King Cnut, and now she wants to remain in that position. So she wants her son on the throne. However, Arthur Canute is in Denmark, and for some reason he stays there. I'm not clear as to how come he stays there. But Harold, the son of Elfgifu, who is a very strong and powerful woman in her own right and very keen on pushing the claim of her own son, he initially becomes sort of a regent until Arthur Canute comes back, and they were going to sort of see how it would pan out then. But he ends up becoming king, and Arthur Canute stays in Denmark. Now, I said I'd go back to talking about Earl Godwin and a bit more about him under Canute's reign, because this is the real significance of how the Godwins, and therefore Harold Godwin's son, becomes such a contender for the throne after Edward the Confessor dies. So Earl Godwin is pretty much the only Englishman who rises during Canute's reign, because Canute comes in and he replaces all the English nobility with Danes. But Earl Godwin had gone back to Norway, with him, and to take the throne when his brother died, and he'd been shown himself to be loyal and brave, and he did very, very well under Canute, becoming the second most powerful man in the kingdom. And you can tell that by the order in which signatures appear on charters, and Earl Godwin is at the top. Canute had also married, or had, Earl Godwin married to his sister-in-law. It's a complicated sister-in-law relationship. It was sort of his sister's brother's sister. Anyway, let's call it sister-in-law kin. So Earl Godwin marries Canute's sister-in-law, a Danish lady called Gytha Thoriksdottir. Their children, therefore, had Danish names. Hence why we have Harold Tostig, and their daughter was called Edith. Now, you've probably heard of, you've heard of Harold Godwinson. Tostig was his brother. They end up fighting at Stamford Bridge. Edith, the daughter, becomes eventually the wife of Edward the Confessor. So the Godwins are very, very powerful, and very influential. But anyway, that's why they have Danish names, is because their mother was Danish. Now, back to who's going to succeed Canute in the throne. In the autumn of 1016, when Queen Emma realizes that it can't be 16, but when Queen Emma realizes that her plan to get her son Arthur Canute onto the throne isn't going to work, she persuades her sons by Ethelred, Edward, and Alfred to come back from Normandy. She persuades them by telling them that there is a huge groundswell of support for them. Now, that wasn't true. And when Edward tried to land at Southampton, he was met with violent resistance, so he managed to escape and he got back to Normandy. His brother, however, Alfred, he landed, I think it was at Dover, and he was met by Earl Godwin. Earl Godwin swore allegiance to him, took him back to his home at Guildford, and there Alfred and his entourage were wined and dined. But then that night they were all attacked in their beds as they slept. Alfred's companions were killed or maimed or sold into slavery. Earl Godwin's wife, as a side note, but very harrowingly interesting, Gytha, she was a particular slave trader. She was very her speciality were young people sold into sex slavery. So there you go, not a very nice woman. But anyway, so that was a thing. Alfred himself was taken to London to the king, to Harold. Now, Harold you might have heard of him as Harold Harefoot, although we don't, or I can't seem to find anywhere that says for certain why he was called Harold Harefoot. But that's hence why we have Harold the First. So when Harold Godwinson becomes king, he's Harold the Second. The only counting that begins before the Norman conquest of 1066. There you go. So Alfred is taken to Harold Harefoot, King Harold, who orders that he is blinded. Now, this was a thing that was done with alarming frequency in the upper echelons of society. You basically made your rival useless. I mean, they would blind, they would castrate. Now, he was taken out to the fens of Anglia. The deed was done, and he was left with the monks at Ely. And unfortunately, he died from his injuries. So Emma's son, by one of her sons, by Ethelred the Unready, was killed in this fashion. Now, Earl Godwin's part in this, of course, demonstrated his loyalty to the sitting king, Harold I, Harold Harefoot. But it would come back to haunt him when Edward the Confessor, the brother of Alfred, became king. Harold Harefoot died in 1040, and it's at this point that his half-brother, Arthur Canute, came back and took the throne. He was actually invited to come back and take the throne. Now, he made a big mistake because Canute had begun something called a ship. Well, it was a ship tax. Basically, he had a standing navy of sorts that was paid a particular amount per rower, and he had something like 16 ships. Arthur Canute comes back with the same idea that is exactly what he wants to do, but he comes back with 62 ships. The maths means that basically huge taxes were then. There was a huge tax burden on on the population. It didn't make Arthur Canute particularly popular. And eventually he actually invites his half-brother, Edward, because they both have the same mother in Emma. He invites him to England, and he's sort of sworn in as king as like a to kind of share rule, but or that he's definitely to show that he's definitely his successor. So you get this bizarre situation in 1041 where you have two kings in situ. They're half brothers by the same mother. Their fathers are two different succeeding kings. Well, slightly not quite succeeding, but kings of England. And it's at this time that Emma actually commissions her own chronicle of her life, and it sort of tries to begin to explain this. And she does it by comparing this odd, I don't want to say threesome, triumvirate to the Holy Trinity, saying that they never disagreed, they got on really well. I mean, that's very unlikely, but what it neatly does is put her as an equal with her sons. So you get an impression of Emma here. She sounds very interesting. Not sure whether I would have liked her, but very good. On the 8th of June, 1042, Arthur Canute collapses and dies at a wedding. He's only in his early 20s, and apparently in good health, and sources insinuate foul play. Surprise, surprise. Either way, this leaves Edward as sole king. Edward has been in Normandy for most of his life. 25 years he was in Normandy. He has no real allies in England. He hasn't got a massive entourage that's come with him from Normandy that he can place enough people who he knows are loyal to him in significant positions to have the same sort of control as we saw Canute manage to take in 1015. 1016. So who's he got to rely on? Earl Godwin. Earl Godwin, incredibly powerful. He's rich. He's influential. He's popular. People like Earl Godwin. So there's this public sort of reconciliation where the Earl swears that he had no intention that harm would come to Alfred when he invited him into his home and had all his followers murdered or maimed or sold, and took Alfred to Harold Harefoot. No, it's all mistaken. Very innocent. And in 1045, Edward marries Earl Godwin's daughter, Edith. And Edith actually commissions a piece called The Life of Edward. Again, another interesting woman. So we've got two women here commissioning their own chronicles, Emma and Edith. And in Edith's one, it states that Edith was close to perfection. Well, if you're going to get something written about you, why not? So you've got Edward, though, and his father-in-law, Earl Godwin, with very different attitudes to the what remains of that Danish conquest and quite long rule of King Canute. They also clash over. So they clash over support for the Danes, and they also clash over ecclesiastical appointments. Edward appoints his friend Robert of Jumiere as Archbishop of Canterbury. Godwin doesn't want this because that puts someone else influential in between him and the king. He wants to be the one who has the influence, so he's not very keen on this. Now, obviously, the purpose behind marrying his daughter to the king for Earl Godwin was that his bloodline would be able to take the throne, would succeed to the throne, and their family's control would remain in place. However, gets 1051, 6 years of marriage, and there is still no children. So there's no Godwin bloodline to the throne via the sitting king. And so in 1051, at a spring council, this is where Edward proposes that on his death, the crown should go to his cousin, William, Duke of Normandy. And there is, a lot of toing and froing and stories around then whether the crown is passed to William of Normandy, but that's not quite the purpose of me doing this today. We can do that in a different live. In 1051, though, Duke William visited England, possibly to reconfirm himself as Edward's confessor. Now, remember, Edward has a big affiliation to Normandy and to the Normans. So, although he's an English king, his heart is in Normandy, I suppose. He was there for 25 years. This is where he grew up. It's the homeland of his mother, and everyone in England, the Godwins most certainly, not his favourite people. I mean, there had been an actual full-on altercation, fight, almost civil war with the Godwins, where all of them were banished and Edith was sent to a nunnery. And it's by virtue of the fact that Edward couldn't really muster a good enough force compared to what the Godwins could, and the Godwins' popularity, that meant Edward in the end had to reconcile with the Godwins, bring Edith back to court, and then from that point on, really, he's a cipher. They're in control. So the idea that Harold Godwinson swore an allegiance to William of Normandy is an interesting story to go into, and like I say, maybe I will cover that one on a different live if you would like to. But we're getting the idea of how all these men are linked. Now, in 1052, so in 1052, this is when the Godwin family come back. There's this reconciliation. It's badged as a reconciliation, but really Edward loses. But in 1053, on Easter Monday, Earl Godwin suffers a stroke and he dies, and he's buried at Winchester. Queen Emma, I think, dies around this time as well. She's also in Winchester, as is King Cnut. They were just as a side note, they were. I don't know about Godwin, but certainly Emma and Canute are in the bone chests at Winchester Cathedral, which you may have seen. I posted some pictures of them over Christmas. beautiful bone chests, unfortunately prized open during the English civil wars of the 17th century, which I'll be talking to Jonathan Healy about, and the bones scattered and everything. But anyway, that's as an aside. So Earl Godwin suffers a seizure and dies. Now, actually, the population of England, I don't know down to what level care, to be fair, but the people who mattered, in inverted commas, are more than happy that Earl Godwin has a son in Harold Godwinson, who is as capable, if not more, as popular, if not more, to succeed him. There was actually, interestingly, an older brother to Harold, a Svein, but he isn't mentioned in Queen Edith's commission, in her chronicle, because he was he just brought embarrassment to the family. He'd abducted and raped an abbess of Leominster. He later murdered his own cousin. He was a wrong 'un, and he actually died on the way back from pilgrimage to Jerusalem, which I think he'd been sent on to try and, well, probably one, get him out of the way, and two, obviously, maybe one, pay penance for what he'd done, two, try and get him out of the way. But he dies on the way back anyway. So Harold is the eldest son by the time that their father dies. And so after 1052, like I say, Edward the Confessor is really under Godwin control. And that's demonstrated. Well, one clear demonstration of that is the Archbishop of Canterbury. So I said Edward had appointed Robert as Jumier, say something like that. And but when the Godwins came back, he skedaddled to the continent, and a new Archbishop of Canterbury was appointed, Stigand, Archbishop Stigand, a Godwin ally, basically. So you can see that that Edward the Confessor is really just the front for Godwin control. Thus, when Edward dies on the 5th of January 1066, it is not odd. In fact, it's quite a natural choice for Harold Godwinson to have been chosen and sworn in as king. There were other contenders. We obviously know about William, Duke of Normandy. There's actually a boy called Edward known now as Edward the Exile, who was one of the sons that I mentioned of Edmund Ironside, who were sent over to the continent to be quietly murdered by Canute. They weren't murdered, and that line still existed. And but he was a young boy, unknown, never pretty much been in the country. So the candidates: Harold Godwinson, popular, rich, proven, and then you had a Norman contender in Duke William, people not interested, or Edward the Exile, a child. So actually, the natural choice is Harold Godwinson. So that's how those three men are linked. Edward did confront his his father-in-law about his involvement in his brother Alfred's murder. This was when he managed to banish them for a bit. So clearly, Edward never really got over that, and it wasn't really a very happy marriage, but it was and family situation. But that's how those three men are linked. So I hope that is a useful, interesting explanation that you could follow. Anglo-Saxon England is fascinating, and it links to one of the stories that I was going to cover today. So what I want to do is, each time I do this show, like I say, it's going to be every 2 weeks, I'm going to cover something that is in the news. Now, if you see a story that you would like me to cover, and you are a member of my Patreon, or you are a paying Substack member or you want to drop me a super chat on here, then you can put forward, because you can get in touch with me that way, basically, a story for me to cover. Equally, if there's a topic you'd like me to cover, you can ask me. And the other thing that I'll come back to this in a bit more detail later, is I would like to each fortnight do a 3-minute explainer video, or a 3-minute explainer section, should I say. And I'll be looking for topics for that, but I'll come back and explain a little bit more on that in a moment. So the first story, now I'm going to read this. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to bring it up, because I've never done this before. This is a BBC story. Let's go for it. Right. Can you still see me? Yes. Okay. Here we go. So this is a new form of DNA testing. So this article is from the 1st of January 2025, written by Pallab Ghosh for the BBC. And I'll summarise it a bit for you, but they've basically, scientists from King's College London have come up with a method by which they can see changes in DNA down to a much shorter time period. So one of the problems with seeing with DNA evidence is it has been difficult to separate out changes that have happened over a massive long period of time, and those that might have happened during a generation or two. For example, when the Anglo-Saxons come into Britain, following the departure of the Roman Empire, and for instance, things they're hoping that this technique will be able to demonstrate, were those, did they come in and integrate, marry, have children, or was it more a complete replacement? What is it? Was it a push out? So this is what the sort of thing they're hoping that they will be able to establish, and they call it, I kind of need to find it down here. They call it, where's it gone? They've got this technique, this little phrase for it. Oh, where is it? Twig stats. There we go. So this technique is known as twig stats, and they explain it by saying, okay, so they combed the genetic data of thousands of human remains on an online or from an online scientific database, then calculated how closely they were related to each other, which chunks of DNA were inherited from which groups and when. That created a family tree where older changes appeared in earlier branches and more recent changes showed up in newer twigs, hence the name twig stats. So it'd be very exciting if this technique can actually start to give more detail. It's an extra piece to the puzzle of what happens when, especially the further back you go. So I think that will be really interesting to see. And the other story, and get to it, this one's on Stonehenge. So what I'm going to do is, if I can do this, is I'm going to put up a picture of Stonehenge instead, because it's prettier than looking at the article online. I've got 2 pictures of Stonehenge. I promised you. So this is a recent one. I think it's taken in. This one was taken in the past couple of years. So if you're listening on the podcast, is basically a modern day picture of Stonehenge, and this one is a picture drawing. It was it was published in a book that was published in 1880 called Early Man in Britain and His Place in the Tertiary Period. Catchy. It was published by Macmillan, and the caption, in the book, it just refers to, it was illustrated by Brown, and the caption read, "Stonehenge as it probably was," which I really like that, the way they worded that. So the article is on popularmechanics.com, and it was published on the 2nd of January by Darren Orff, and it's a new discovery suggests Stonehenge had a secret second purpose all along. So you've probably heard many times Stonehenge was a calendar, or it was a astrological tool, or or it was a temple, or it was, they I mean, they say second second use, but anyway, I think there's been a few suggestions over the years, and what they're saying is that that a new study claims that the monument may have been built in part to unify people across Britain. And they have based this on the fact that the stones used in the construction of Stonehenge come from various parts of the United Kingdom. So some come from Wales, some come from a bit closer to where Stonehenge is, so they'd be English, if you like. And the altar that was at Stonehenge was from Scotland. So the theory goes that that those different stones were brought in from the different parts of Britain to sort of signify links, these eternal links. So Mike Parker Pearson, excuse me, from UCL, University of, yeah, that could be Central Lancashire or London, I'm not sure. Probably can find out. But it says the fact that all of its stones originated from distant regions, making it unique among over 900 stone circles in Britain, because that should be said, Stonehenge, well, that we have a lot of stone circles, Stonehenge obviously being the biggest and the most significant that we still have, presumably ever had. That the fact that the stones come from different regions suggests that the stone circle may have had a political as well as a religious purpose, as a monument of unification for the peoples of Britain, celebrating their eternal links and their ancestry and the cosmos. So there you go. Another theory for Stonehenge. University of Central Lancashire. Yeah. Oh, is it, Maria? Okay. It was UCL a couple of decades ago, only because I know that because somebody else went there. So they're probably fighting it out for the acronym. Okay, so that was history in the news. I said I'd say a bit more about the 3-minute explainer. So I would love to stick in every fortnight a 3-minute explainer video. This could be something, I don't know, just a question you've thought, well, what does that mean? So for some, I don't know, for example, something like what is the royal court? I've been asked that before. Something like, it'd be quite nice if some of them were a challenge as well, actually, to get them in 3 minutes. I'm going to put a counter on and a countdown timer on, and we'll do it like that. Why was King John considered a bad king? What was the Glorious Revolution? Who were the Jacobites? I don't know, anything like that you're particularly you want me to try and explain in 3 minutes, then please do suggest them to me, and I will put them into this part of the British History Live. Okay, so now we're getting on to so I'm going to come back to one of our final things will be asking. Oh yeah, one of our final. So excuse me. So I'm going to talk about history events now, because I've got a few online events that I think you'll be interested in, and then we're going to get on to AI's attempts at creating Whitehall Palace and ice skating on the Thames. We'll come back to that. Hilarious. Okay, so first of all, just to mention, and a few of you I know are watching already know about this, but we are discussing, if you are interested, Leander Delisle's After Elizabeth book in book club, and next book club meeting is the 19th of January. So I'm mentioning it now because it's the day before I go live here again. If you would like to come along and discuss this book, that I've got a lot of reading to do, then please go along to my Patreon, patreon.com/British history, and you can join. And book club is you're automatically a member of book club if you join my Patreon. This is all about the succession of James I, James VI of Scotland, obviously becoming James I of England after Elizabeth Tudor, Elizabeth I dies, and how that kind of worked. Now, this is going to fit very well, I think, with another book that we're doing this year, Queen James by Gareth Russell. And I'll make quick mention here that if you join my Patreon within the next couple of weeks, you will be able to ask Gareth, well, you'll be able to put forward your own question for Gareth about his new book, Queen James, because I will be interviewing Gareth to tie in with the launch of his book at the end of February in the UK, and unfortunately in the US and probably Australia, you've got to wait a little bit longer if you want to wait for it to be released in your country. However, you can. I've got an affiliate link to Blackwell's, and you can actually you can get them to send it to you when it's released in England, so you'll be able to get your hands on it. But anyway, okay, so yeah, so we've got book club. The other thing I want to mention to you is an online event. I'm not just going to plug my own events, by the way, in the future, but this one is too good not to do it straight away. And it is the Wars of the Roses online history festival. It's taking place from the 21st to the 23rd of March. We've got these 6 incredible speakers. Gareth Russell will be talking about the Butlers versus the Fitzgeralds, how the Wars of the Roses split Ireland and paved the way for Perkin Warbeck. We've got Nathan Armeen talking about the House of Beaufort. Got Matthew Lewis of History Hit fame, talking about Richard, Duke of York, King by Right. Julian Humphreys is his talk is The Fog of War, Battles of the Wars of the Roses. Elizabeth Norton, her talk is She-Wolves, Upstarts and Ciphers, Queenship in the Wars of the Roses. Last but not least, Evan Roger, Treason in the Wars of the Roses. And Ewan, excuse me, he is. I covered the Treason exhibition at the National Archives that I went to probably a couple of years ago now, and there was a book called History of Treason which went with it. Ewan is one of the co-authors and one of the co-curators of that, co-authors of the book and co-creator of curator, excuse me, of the National Archives exhibition that had been on. So we've got these are top-notch speakers. Now, if you can make it live, then we have this talks going live over the weekend, and then we have a live question and answer session with all 6 speakers on the Sunday evening. So that's the 23rd of March. We also have a bit of a fun quiz afterwards and a free prize draw. So there's a bit of fun there. And if you can't make it live, then don't worry. All the talks, as long as you buy your ticket before the weekend that it takes place, all of the talks are available until the 31st of May 2025. It is a little bit cheaper buying it that way, and than after the fact. But if there are previous online history festivals which you weren't able to make and you would like to still see them, you can get hold of all of them at buymeacoffee.com/Philippa, which is Philippa. So there's 2 Stuart's online history festivals available. There's a Georgians one and a Tudors one. You can buy them as standalone. You can also buy them as an add-on to your ticket if you haven't bought one for this online history festival yet. So yeah, there you go. So tickets for the entire weekend, we don't charge per talk. We just charge one ticket price for the entire weekend is £21.50 or £18 if you are a member of my Patreon. You can see building up why it's a good idea to become part of my Patreon if you're into all this stuff. Okay, so that's really cool. Now, as a final little treat for you, and the final section of the new British History Live show. AI's attempts at creating for me a video I could use to demonstrate X, Y, or Z. Let's go for it. So, so there were a couple of anniversaries this week. I haven't written them down, so I'm going to have to do this off the top of my head. But I was looking to share, or me and my daughter helps me with my social media now. We're thinking of doing the big freeze of, I think it was 13. Oh, did I put it in? 13 something. Anyway, which froze the River Thames, and people were lighting bonfires on the River Thames. Now, you've got to remember the River Thames was much, much wider then. It was much slower. It's not the River Thames that we've got today, which is sort of channeled through. However, clearly a very, very, very cold winter. So I asked AI to create an image for me of people skating on a frozen, no, I didn't, not skating, bonfires on the River Thames. And they started with this one. So bonfires on the River Thames in 1310. Doesn't look particularly 1310-ish, does it? How it doesn't know. So I thought, okay, fine. Fair enough. I haven't said frozen. So let's do that. And this is what I got instead. Amazing. There's even a crane. In fact, I think there's 2 cranes in the background. Bonfires on the frozen River Thames in 1310 with skyscrapers and cranes and just a random fire. Okay, so I thought, all right, fine. That's too difficult. Surely I can ask it to do a Whitehall Palace, because again, we're near the anniversary of, in this case, Whitehall Palace being burnt pretty much to the ground, to its entirety. We have banqueting house left and a few bits and bobs throughout Whitehall, but Whitehall Palace basically got destroyed. Yeah, Gina says maybe it thought I meant 1310 in the afternoon. Okay. Tell me then, what is going on here? Let me play it. I asked for Whitehall Palace. Now, it's created a building, a white building that could, I mean, it looks more like an office block of the East India Company or something stupid like that. But what on earth is going on with these people in the water? What is that? What is that? I don't think we've got too much to worry about. Honestly, you wait till you see some of the others I've got set up for you. I've got lined up for you because I was asking it to do stuff. Oh my goodness. So this is going to be a new feature. And if you've got anything, if you come across anything, because like the new Google AI is coming up with some very interesting answers to history questions. I couldn't get it to repeat it, but I swear to you that the other day I plugged in who were the contenders to succeed Elizabeth I. It put Mary I, her dead half sister, and I wish I'd screenshot it because I couldn't get it to do it again. But anyway, so maybe it's, you can't even say it's like what is put in, you know, they say you can only put out what quality you put in. But anyway, I think there might be some legs to that feature because it's definitely got a long way to go. So so I will see you again on the 20th of January at the same time, 6:30 p.m. UK time. I hope it's a good time for you as well. Maybe you're watching on the catch up or listening on the podcast as well, which means you are listening at any time and time that suits you. So that's lovely. Um, get in touch with me. If you want me, if you see a interesting history news article, or there's a topic you want to get in touch with me. If you want to get in touch with me, you need to be a member of my Patreon, patreon.com/British history, or a paid up member of my Substack. Both of those are really low cost. So hopefully no barrier if you do want to do that. Please support me for free as well. Obviously, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm nearly at 11,000 subscribers now. Really, really, really happy about that. Thank you so much if you are subscribed. Please do share it with friends if you think they will enjoy it. Comment, all of that kind of stuff. It all helps. And I will leave you all to your day. Welcome to 2025. Thank you for joining me for this first one. I am really, I'm really happy to be back. I had quite a long break due to an operation I had on my eye. You might see it's still a little bit, red, but anyway, it's getting there. So it's nice to be back. It's lovely to see you all in the comments. I hope you are all having a great start to your 2025. And yeah, I will see you all again in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks, everyone. Bye.